outside of your profession, which I assume you're getting questions every day on that.
Absolutely.
But, personally, what are your views with your son and him going back to school?
So this is a hot button topic, and I'm speaking as a dad now, not as a physician,
Sure.
but it's hard for me not to separate the two. So I obviously, whatever I do, I try my best to follow scientific data, right? So let me just backtrack, because I have friends, I have colleagues who will say, well, I have quarantine fatigue. I'm so over COVID-19. I'm just done. I need a break. So I get it. And I understand the psychological and mental ramifications of quarantine, this, that, and the other. I didn't really have time to think about it in March and April, because like I said, in the tri-state, our hospital, or I had a department, was the epicenter, and for better or for worse. And so obviously I'm talking from a very different experience, but I saw just a lot of terrible things, and it greatly affected me, myself. And I'm not alone. I'm not unique. I mean, it was all my colleagues who were right there with me, doctors, nurses, all the frontliners, EMTs, respiratory techs, what have you. But to say we all have PTSD from that is not an understatement by any means. So I just want to give a little background. But then I used to drive home to my town, which is a lovely town, Ridgewood, New Jersey. Some people will say it's a little bubble here, but it's fantastic, beautiful town, beautiful downtown, wonderful people, a lot of, like, you can say, since you're from New York, ex-New Yorkers who subsequently moved out. So they're educated, they're driven, they're definitely type A, but they're very worldly, and they also are very opinionated. But a lot of people did the right thing. They quarantined, and they weren't personally affected, right? They're, because a lot of people in this town are professionals, so they are able to work from home. They may not have had the same economic and financial strain that other people of different socioeconomic backgrounds, it's well described now, have had. And so I feel that there's a disconnect, and so once the weather it's easy in March and April when it's chilly, days are shorter. It might be fun. Okay, we're staying home, kids are home from school, I'm working from home, we're watching Netflix, we're doing this. I'm not trying to downplay anyone's experience, but from a whole, a lot of people said, hey, it wasn't so bad. And you might see stuff on the news, and I saw every day. Then I would drive home to people walking their dog and riding their bike, and I'm like, man, I just went through hell. Not me, but I just saw people going through hell. And I'm obviously talking about the patients and patients' families. But things are okay here, And then when the warmer weather came, I think a lot of people that were maybe disconnected from it directly were saying, look, I'm ready to get back to work, I'm ready to get right back to school, this, that, and the other. So I understand all that sentiment, but what I would just strive, what I've tried to strive as a dad as well as a physician, because again, it's hard to separate. I mean, I don't separate it, especially in this situation, is that let science guide you, not feelings, right? Because just because it's summer doesn't mean, and you think you need a summer vacation doesn't mean COVID's gone. Just because someone has quarantine fatigue doesn't mean it's gone. It's still there just like it was in March and April. Yes, we have better testing, and we have clinical trials, and while we have no cure, we have drugs and clinical trials, and for investigation drugs, and we have studies showing that what interventions work or would likely work and which ones. It's still out there, and we know that. So it becomes very difficult having this conversation, because you need to separate emotion from just science. And so I look at this from a total scientific background, but with the full disclosure that I was somewhat scarred, I'll be honest, from experience in March and April. So first and foremost, as things open up, I think New Jersey is doing a great job. New York is doing a good job as well. New Jersey, Rhode Island, up until recently, only states where you have decreasing incidents. Compare that to Florida, where you are now, say Texas, Arizona, South Carolina, etc. So why is that? Because they're not letting emotion getting in the way. They're not saying, well, it's summer and it's just time to go. It's time to have crabs. I would love to have crabs. I would love to have seafood. I would love to have drinks in a bar inside. But no, if we look at the science tells us that if you're looking at all activities, and short of quarantining in your house, what are the low-risk activities? And we realized early on, okay, non-contact sports, so golf, tennis, running, anything outside, right, that you have a low density of people. And why is that? So let's take a step back. It's because from a scientific point of view, even if person A was positive and person B, they were having drinks outside, they were just talking outside, the air, the environment dilutes that virus. So the amount of viral load the patient B gets from person B gets from person A is a less of a viral load, and there's a good chance if someone's healthy that their immune system can handle it and they never get sick. So we know now that the environment and that dilution of the viral load makes outdoor activities, while not no risk, much less risky than it would other activities, right? So the higher risk activities are indoor, especially indoor eating, drink bars. We see a lot of transmission driven in Florida and Texas, South Carolina from bars and restaurants because it's loud, there's music, it's almost impossible to socially isolate. The more you become under the influence of whatever cocktail you might be drinking, we know that your inhibitions decrease. You're raising your glass to your face, you're touching your face, you're eating inside, you're touching your face. It's a perfect storm, if you will. And it might be hot, it might be packed full of people. Perfect storm for spread of disease. So When I'm talking about back to school, I think we have to look at a couple things. One is, what is the ability to keep kids apart from each other, while at the same time, and this is the other second part of the scientific background, what I'm using is that we realize that masks do work. And I'm the first to admit that from a scientific community, I think we were slow to the game of having a general public wear masks. And then we realized, no, even of course, the mask that the most hopefully you're wearing when you're out and about, most people that are listening are wearing when they're out and about, that's a surgical mask. That's not an N95. The N95 is much more effective, but it's also hard to wear. It creates a very tight seal, especially in the summertime, it's very hot. But even a surgical mask, while I wouldn't recommend that to someone who's a healthcare worker going to see a patient, it still does afford, now we've seen scientific data to prove that, a decent degree of protection, right? So that, along with social distancing, hand hygiene, not touching your face, washing your hands, all the stuff that we've heard 10,000 times now over and over again, are effective. So we need to use that scientific background and that scientific discussion anytime you're making an argument or a plan for bringing kids back to school. Not that, well, Mike, it's just bad for the kids and they're playing video games, or my kid has to get back to school because they're missing the prom. And I get all of that, but I find that's all secondary. We have to really approach it from a scientific point of view. So once you do it from that point of view, say, okay, so now what is our school's ability to, one, social distance? Do we have the staff, the infrastructure to keep, let's say, 50% capacity? Now, in Florida, maybe you can have outdoor classes. They've even discussed that even here in New Jersey. But we know that's not realistic. I mean, yes, the winters are getting milder and climate change, and that's a whole, I guess, a podcast for a different day. But let's be honest, it's still New Jersey, New York tri-state, so no one's going to expect you to have tent classes in November, December, January, February, and March. So the idea is that, can we have a system in place where kids are required to wear masks? When they're at their seat, are they more than 6 feet apart in a well-ventilated area that has adequate HVAC and air filtration systems? And then, will kids be compliant? Will the teachers be compliant? And how do you do that? I mean, so from a general perspective, I would imagine that most schools will have to have 50% kids divided into two different camps, and whether it's an AM, PM session with a cleaning in between, or Monday, Wednesday, Friday for half the kids, and then Tuesday, Thursday, and then alternate the following week. I think those are things that people have to look at. But that is fraught with issues, right? Because there's also issues of teachers who have to wear masks all the time, and teachers may say, well, I have an underlying condition, I don't want to bring it to my family, I have kids at home, so what do you do? Now, there's two schools of thought, I mean, one would say physicians, healthcare workers also face the same adversity, and I have a kid at home and I have a wife at home, I didn't want to affect it. But one might say, I signed up for this and teachers didn't. So that's obviously a point of debate. So there's a lot of moving parts. There's teachers say and teacher labor unions who may sue if they're forced to go back, or they may refuse to work. Some teachers that are younger say my chance of getting infected or getting sick, even if I'm infected, are very low, and I'm just starting my career and I need to work. So there's a lot of moving parts there. So I think we have to ensure not just the safety of the kids, but we can't forget ensuring the safety and the well-being of the teachers as well. And then we have to look at what is the plan in place, because I can tell you, my kid was having, I think that the school system in my town did an excellent job, but by 11, 12 o'clock, he was usually done because he's a smart kid. He can finish his stuff early. My wife's still working at home, and then he would say, can I go play video games? And then she had to divide her time, not only as working full time in a demanding job, but also like filling in the gaps of my kid's education, because obviously I cannot work from home. I was in the hospital every day from like 8 to 8 or 8 to 9 every day for 60 days straight, all of March and April. So there's a lot of issues in play. And of course, now I'm just talking about parents who have professional jobs. What about parents who have to go back to work, right? Whether their jobs demand them or they have jobs such that it cannot be done from a distance. And then, will there be daycare for the kids? Is that going to put an unfair economic strain where one parent will have to decide between keeping their kids at home or quitting their job so they can teach their kids? So there's a lot of moving parts, obviously, and there's no one right answer that I can provide. So, and my answer may not be right for other people. So what I would say, and that's a very broad view, but I would say is that if you let science guide you, then you're much better off than letting emotion and other issues, which still, even economic, socially, etc., are important, but I think we have to let science guide. So there has to be very strict policies that are guided by science and not by emotion of, and look, one only has to look at your local town's Facebook mom and dad's page or something similar to see all the different opinions that are out there, and they're all oftentimes very varying. So, and some may say, I trust science. Other people say, forget science. This is my kid suffering. He can't go to this sporting event. He can't do this, whether it's prom or graduation or what have you. So I think everyone should be respectful when they have these conversations and not downplay the importance of one versus the other. But I think we have to make science paramount. And so now that's the crux of this discussion. What is the science? The science, again, is that kids are compliant with wearing masks, if they are socially distant, if there's effective HVAC and air filtration systems, then the overall risk, while not zero, is certainly low. You have to look at low, medium, and high and place an activity in that stage. Having said that, there's still potential risks for teachers, and so one have to take that into account. And I think then that's where a school system or a board of education or a town can start making policies that are best for the individual in that location. And again, if you're basing it on science, we also have to look at the prevalence and incidence of cases in that area. So now it's July 21st. Think about what was happening January 21st. No one could have imagined what would happen in March. So what's going to happen after Labor Day and what that may look like may be very different than what our situation is now. It's a very fluid situation, always has been. It's only been 6 months since this pandemic has hit the United States and our shores. And it has been extremely fluid in terms of, as a physician, what we're learning and our knowledge base, and then of course how we react to it. So it has to continue to be so. And people also have to realize that if things get out of control in September and October, and then you add flu and other respiratory pathogens to the mix, then maybe you'll have to put a pause on the back to school movement and even backtrack and go back to at home.